When Tom Hanks brought C.S. Forrester's naval thriller to life, the production became a masterclass in wartime authenticity mixed with cutting-edge technology. From a museum ship that floats and sinks with Mississippi River levels to a director who personally took 20,000 photographs to build a digital destroyer, the making of Greyhound is filled with surprising secrets. The film's ultra-short runtime, family cameos, and pandemic-driven release created one of the strangest Hollywood war productions in recent memory. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Greyhound. Fact 1. The ship literally rises and falls daily. Most movie sets stay exactly where the production team puts them, but the USS Kidd used for filming Greyhound had other ideas. This World War II destroyer sits in the Mississippi River in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it moves up and down throughout the year based on the river's water levels, which can change by as much as 40 feet between seasons. The ship doesn't just bob a little bit either. During the low water periods, the entire hull becomes visible, and the destroyer literally sits on keel blocks, like it's in dry dock, while during high water from spring rains and snowmelt, it floats freely on a special mooring system designed specifically for these dramatic changes. The museum's unique cradle system uses portside dolphins and bollards welded to the ship to keep it stable when the water rises. And when the Mississippi drops to its lowest levels, the Kidd rests on blocks with its full underbelly exposed. This happens because Baton Rouge sits too far north for Gulf of Mexico tides to affect the river. So everything depends on rainfall and snowmelt from the massive Mississippi watershed stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachian Mountains. The production crew had to work around this bizarre reality during filming in March of 2018, never knowing exactly how high or low their floating set would be from day to day. This unusual setup actually gave the filmmakers some unexpected advantages when shooting exterior scenes on the ship. When the water was low, they could access parts of the destroyer normally underwater, and when it rose, they got authentic footage of a warship actually floating in water rather than sitting in a permanent dry dock. The USS Kidd is the only World War II destroyer preserved in its original 1945 configuration, and this special mooring system has kept it safe for decades despite the river's constant changes. Director Aaron Schneider and his crew essentially filmed on a set that nature controlled, adding an extra layer of unpredictability to an already complex production. Fact 2. Tom Hanks bought the book for its cover. Sometimes the most important creative decisions happen in the most unexpected places, and for Tom Hanks, that place was a used bookstore somewhere around 2012. He wasn't looking for his next big project or searching for material to adapt. He was just browsing the shelves like any book lover might do on a lazy afternoon. That's when he spotted a worn copy of C.S. Forrester's 1955 novel, The Good Shepherd, sitting among the other secondhand books. And what caught his eye wasn't the author's name or any critical praise on the back cover. It was purely the visual design of the original dust jacket. The cover showed a gray-haired, completely exhausted naval commander standing on the bridge of his ship with his uniform flapping in the wind, and in the background you could see ships sinking and burning on the horizon while one of his crewmen tapped out signals. Hanks later described his reaction to seeing that image, saying the man on the cover looked like he had been through a degree of hell, and that visual alone was enough to make him pick up the book and buy it. He had some historical knowledge about the Battle of the Atlantic, so the subject matter already interested him. But it was really that striking cover art that pulled him in first. What makes this even more interesting is that Hanks admitted he picked up the book specifically because it had the original 1955 cover intact, which is something collectors and book enthusiasts often look for in used bookstores. By page 3 of reading it, he realized the entire novel was told through the mental perspective of its protagonist, Commander George Krauss, and he immediately saw the potential for a screenplay. That chance encounter in a bookstore, driven entirely by an attraction to vintage cover art, eventually became the foundation for a major motion picture 6 or 7 years later. Hanks has often talked about reading history for pleasure, and this purchase perfectly captures how sometimes the smallest details, like an evocative piece of book cover illustration, can spark a creative vision that leads to something much bigger. Fact 3. The director took 20,000 photos of a ship. Before filming even began on Greyhound, director Aaron Schneider embarked on what might be one of the most unusual photography marathons in movie history. He spent 2 full days aboard the USS Kidd museum ship in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, armed with cameras and an ambitious plan to capture every inch of the World War II destroyer. Over those 2 days, Schneider took approximately 20,000 photographs of the ship from every conceivable angle, distance, and perspective. This wasn't just casual reference photography or location scouting, it was a meticulously planned digital scanning process that would become essential to the entire production. Schneider used a technique called photogrammetry, which takes thousands of overlapping photographs and processes them through specialized computer software to create an incredibly detailed 3-dimensional model. The result was a digital replica of the USS Kidd that was accurate to within a single centimeter, capturing not just the ship's overall shape, but every rivet, hatch, gun turret, and weathered surface detail. This virtual destroyer became an invaluable tool that the production team could explore and reference throughout filming. Schneider could place virtual cameras anywhere on the digital ship to test different shot compositions and angles before ever setting foot on the actual set. The visual effects team at DNEG used this same model as the foundation for creating the USS Keeling in the film, and ensuring that when they added computer-generated exterior shots of the ship sailing through the Atlantic, every detail matched the real World War II vessel. What makes this effort even more remarkable is that Schneider and a friend undertook this massive photography project on their own, essentially as an experiment with nothing else to do before the movie officially started production. The 2-week computer processing time to convert those 20,000 images into a usable 3-dimensional model paid off enormously, giving the filmmakers a digital asset that elevated the authenticity and visual consistency of the entire film. Fact 4. They created 1,500 CGI shots in just 4 months. When most Hollywood blockbusters need extensive visual effects work, the production teams typically get anywhere from 6 months to over a year to complete everything, but the crew working on Greyhound didn't have that luxury. The visual effects team at DNEG, led by supervisors Nathan McGuinness and Pete Bebb, had to deliver 1,500 fully computer-generated shots in just 4 months, which is an absolutely brutal timeline by industry standards. What makes this even more remarkable is that these weren't just simple background touch-ups or minor digital enhancements, but rather massive undertaking sequences that required building entire digital worlds from absolutely nothing. The team had to create the complete North Atlantic Ocean with realistic wave physics and lighting, design and animate multiple period-accurate ships moving in perfect formation, build German U-boats that could surface and dive convincingly, and generate the overcast winter sky that hangs over the entire film. Every single element you see when the action moves outside the ship's interior was digitally created, which means the VFX artists essentially had to become experts in World War II naval warfare while working at breakneck speed. They couldn't just guess at details either, because the production demanded historical accuracy for every ship modification, paint scheme, and gun turret placement. The compressed timeline happened because the film had a complicated journey to release, originally planned as a Sony theatrical movie before eventually moving to Apple TV+, and these corporate changes ate into the post-production schedule. Despite the insane pressure, the crew stayed incredibly motivated because they were excited about the project and the challenge of creating such a massive digital undertaking. McGuinness later said they accomplished it because the entire crew became deeply involved in the work, learning naval history and understanding the tactical movements of convoy warfare. The team even created detailed tracking systems that mapped every ship's position throughout the entire film, like a giant game of battleship, ensuring that at any given moment they could pinpoint exactly where each vessel should be in relation to the others. Fact 5. The ocean was made with video game software. When you watch Greyhound and see those massive churning Atlantic waves crashing over the deck of the USS Keeling, You're actually looking at computer-generated water that was created using software originally designed for video games, not Hollywood blockbusters. The visual effects team at DNEG used a program called NVIDIA WaveWorks to simulate the entire ocean throughout the film, which is a pretty unusual choice for a major motion picture. NVIDIA WaveWorks is a physics-based simulation tool that game developers use to create realistic water in video games, and it had never really been used at this scale for a feature film before. Director Aaron Schneider, who happens to be a self-taught visual effects artist, decided to experiment with this gaming software because it could generate incredibly accurate ocean physics based on real-world data. He was able to input specific variables like wave height, the speed of the ships, and even the mass of each vessel, and the program would calculate exactly how the water should behave around them. The visual effects supervisors Nathan McGuinness and Pete Bebb explained that the ocean was essentially another character in the movie that had to be developed with as much care as anything else. They needed the water to look cold, rough, and unforgiving, matching the harsh conditions of the North Atlantic in winter 1942. By using WaveWorks, they could create physics-based movement that felt authentic rather than just pretty, which was crucial for a war film that prided itself on historical accuracy. What made this approach even more remarkable was the compressed timeline. The team had to create 1,500 computer-generated shots in just 4 months, which is an incredibly tight schedule for this level of visual effects work. The gaming software actually helped them move faster because it automated a lot of the complex physics calculations that would normally require manual adjustment, shot by shot. Every time you see a ship cutting through waves or a wake spreading behind a destroyer, that's video game technology seamlessly integrated into a $70 million World War II epic. Fact 6. Tom Hanks' son had a cameo role. Working with family on a film set can create some unexpectedly heartwarming moments, and that's exactly what happened during the production of Greyhound, when Tom Hanks shared the screen with his son, Chet Hanks. Chet plays a crew member named Bushnell, or one of the sonar operators aboard the destroyer who appears in a particularly tense scene set during a violent Atlantic storm. The moment comes in the middle of the film when the ship is being hunted by German U-boats circling the convoy, and every crew member is on high alert, trying to track the enemy submarines through the churning water. Tom Hanks later appeared on Stephen Colbert's Late Night Show and couldn't stop gushing about the experience of working with his son on the film. He explained that when it came time to shoot their scene together, he found it almost impossible to maintain his character's intensity and focus. Instead of staying in character as the stern, exhausted Commander Ernest Krauss, Hanks admitted he kept breaking into what he called the dad face, a beaming grin of pride that had nothing to do with naval warfare and everything to do with watching his son perform. The scene required serious dramatic tension as Chet's character Bushnell tracks Nazi U-boats on sonar equipment while the ship rocks violently in heavy seas, but Tom found himself genuinely impressed by how professional and skilled Chet was in the role. This wasn't actually the first time the two had worked together on screen. Chet had previously appeared in Tom's 2011 romantic comedy, Larry Crown, where he had a small role delivering a pizza to Julia Roberts' character. Tom made a point of mentioning during interviews that Chet had also been doing excellent work on the television musical drama Empire, showing that his son had become what he called a bona fide actor who's really good at his craft. The proud father moment on the Greyhound set was just one more example of the Hanks family working together in Hollywood, even if it meant the veteran actor had to fight against his natural instinct to smile at his son during what was supposed to be one of the film's most intense sequences. Fact 7. The movie is impossibly short at 91 minutes. When Greyhound hit Apple TV Plus in July of 2020, audiences were surprised to discover that this epic World War II naval thriller clocked in at just 91 minutes from start to finish. To put that in perspective, most major war films run well over 2 hours, with movies like Saving Private Ryan stretching to 2 hours and 49 minutes and Dunkirk running 1 hour and 46 minutes. Greyhound is so short that it's actually closer in length to a typical network television episode block than a traditional feature film, and this wasn't an accident. Director Aaron Schneider and screenwriter Tom Hanks made a deliberate creative choice to strip away almost everything except the raw tension of naval combat. The movie spends roughly 85 of its 91 minutes in continuous battle sequences, with torpedoes flying, depth charges exploding, and Tom Hanks barking navigational commands like "all ahead right flank" and 10 degrees starboard in an endless stream of military jargon. There's virtually no backstory, no character development beyond what you can gather from watching people do their jobs, and after a brief opening scene with Elizabeth Shue, there are no women in the film whatsoever. And critics had mixed reactions to this approach. Some praised the film's efficiency, with Variety calling it less a drama than a tense and sturdy diary of the logistics of battle, while the Chicago Tribune gave it 3 out of 4 stars and described it as trim, narrow of scope, and it runs efficiently and well. Other reviewers were less impressed, with one critic describing it as shorter than a Sunday afternoon nap and just as exciting. But the 90-minute runtime also became one of the film's greatest strengths, maintaining an unrelenting pace that keeps viewers on the edge of their seats without any of the slower character-building moments that typically pad out war movies. The film proved that sometimes less really is more, on delivering a concentrated dose of World War II naval warfare that respects the audience's time while still packing an emotional punch. Fact 8. They filmed on 3 different real warships. When it came to capturing the authentic look and feel of World War II naval vessels, the production team behind Greyhound didn't settle for just one ship or rely entirely on computer graphics. Instead, they went to extraordinary lengths to film on and scan 3 different real warships from the era, each serving a unique purpose in bringing the movie to life. The primary filming location was the USS Kidd, a Fletcher-class destroyer that's permanently docked as a museum ship on the Mississippi River in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This was where the cast and crew spent weeks working, on with the actors training on the actual vessel and exterior shots being captured against the real steel of a genuine World War II destroyer. But the USS Kidd was just the beginning of the production's ambitious ship-hopping strategy. In January of 2018, months before principal photography even started on the Kidd, the filmmakers took their cameras out to sea aboard HMCS Montreal, a frigate of the Royal Canadian Navy. For an entire week, the crew filmed nothing but ocean footage, capturing the dramatic winter waves and stormy skies of the North Atlantic that would become essential reference material for the visual effects team. These real ocean shots were later used as the foundation for digital compositing, with computer-generated ships from the movie digitally inserted into the actual wave footage. And according to naval consultant Gordon Locko, whenever you see a bow wave, a wake, or a ship turning in the film, that's a computer-generated vessel placed on top of HMCS Montreal's real wakes, creating a seamless blend of practical and digital effects. The production also conducted extensive 3-dimensional scanning of 2 museum ships to create digital recreations. HMCS Sackville, the last surviving Flower-class corvette permanently moored in Halifax, Nova Scotia, was scanned in meticulous detail to become the film's fictional Canadian escort ship HMCS Dodge. Meanwhile, the Polish destroyer ORP Błyskawica, a museum ship in Gdynia, Poland, was also scanned to create the movie's Polish destroyer ORP Victor. These scans allowed the visual effects artists to build historically accurate digital ships based on real World War II vessels rather than working from photographs or guesswork alone. Fact 9. A sacred navigation instrument appears in every scene. When Tom Hanks stepped onto the set of Greyhound, he wasn't just preparing to play a World War II naval commander. He was about to receive a piece of history that would quietly appear throughout the entire film. Gordon Locko, the movie's naval consultant from Midland, Ontario, brought with him a small brass navigation instrument that had once belonged to one of his late neighbors, a sailor who had actually participated in real combat during the Battle of the Atlantic. This wasn't just any prop or replica bought from a historical supplier. It was an authentic piece of equipment that had seen actual wartime service on the frigid waters of the North Atlantic during some of the most dangerous convoy operations of the war. Laco, a retired officer of the Royal Canadian Navy who had also worked on Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, understood the importance of honoring the real experiences of the sailors who had fought in these battles. When he presented the navigation device to Hanks, he explained its history and the significance of the object, trusting that the actor would treat it with the reverence it deserved. According to Laco, Hanks immediately understood what was being entrusted to him and showed great respect for the artifact and the story behind it. Rather than placing it in storage or using it for just 1 or 2 shots, Hanks made a deliberate decision to position the brass instrument on the chart table of the pilot house set, where it remained for the duration of filming. If you watch the movie carefully and pay attention during scenes where the camera shows glimpses of the chart table, the navigation area where Krause and his officers plot courses and track enemy positions, you can spot that little round brass navigation device sitting there in almost every single shot. Laco later said in interviews that Hanks understood there were people's experiences to be honored, not just an entertaining story to be told, and that small brass instrument became a quiet memorial to all the real sailors who had crossed those same dangerous waters 8 decades earlier. In fact 10, the wrong class of destroyer for the timeline. When you watch Greyhound, you're seeing the USS Keeling portrayed as a Fletcher-class destroyer sailing through the North Atlantic in February 1942. But here's the problem. That's actually impossible. The first Fletcher-class destroyer wasn't commissioned into service until June 1942, a full 4 months after the events depicted in the film. This creates a genuine historical impossibility that sharp-eyed naval historians and World War II enthusiasts spotted immediately. The Fletcher-class destroyers became the most common and iconic destroyer class in history, with 175 ships built during the war, and their distinctive silhouette is instantly recognizable to anyone who studies naval warfare. The filmmakers likely chose to portray the Keeling as a Fletcher-class vessel for several practical reasons. First, they were filming aboard the USS Kidd, a real Fletcher-class museum ship in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is the only World War II destroyer still maintained in its original 1945 configuration. Second, the Fletcher-class's iconic appearance would be immediately familiar to audiences and lend visual authenticity to the film. And third, there were almost 10 times as many Fletcher-class destroyers built compared to the Mahan-class ships that appear in the original novel. In C.S. Forrester's book, The Good Shepherd, which the movie is based on, the USS Keeling is actually described as a Mahan-class destroyer. The Mahan class would have been historically accurate for the February 1942 timeline, since all 18 Mahan-class destroyers were in service before World War II began, with the first entering service in 1936. However, the Mahan-class ships are far less well-known and less visually iconic than their Fletcher-class successors. Interestingly enough, none of the Mahan-class destroyers actually served in the Atlantic theater either. They all spent the entire war fighting in the Pacific, which creates another layer of historical complexity that the filmmakers chose to sidestep by using the more famous Fletcher-class design instead. Fact 11. The movie earned $70 million without theaters. Greyhound never played in a single movie theater. Yet it became one of the most expensive streaming acquisitions in Hollywood history and broke viewership records for Apple TV+. The film was originally produced by Sony Pictures with a budget exceeding $50 million and was designed specifically for the big screen experience, with massive naval battle sequences meant to be viewed on the largest screens possible. Sony had scheduled a theatrical release for Father's Day weekend in June of 2020. Perfectly timed to attract the war movie-loving audience that would turn out to see Tom Hanks in a World War II naval drama. But when the COVID-19 pandemic shut down theaters worldwide in March of 2020, Sony faced a difficult decision about what to do with their completed film. After delaying the release multiple times and watching as theaters remained closed with no clear reopening date in sight, Sony made the unusual choice to sell the distribution rights entirely rather than wait for theaters to reopen. Apple TV+, which was still a relatively new streaming service, struggling to compete with Netflix and Disney+, saw an opportunity to make a major acquisition that would bring attention to their platform. In May of 2020, Apple paid Sony approximately $70 million for the worldwide distribution rights to Greyhound, making it one of the largest streaming deals ever completed at that time. The film premiered exclusively on Apple TV Plus on July 10, 2020. And Apple immediately announced that Greyhound had achieved the biggest opening weekend viewership of any program in the platform's history up to that point. Trade publications like Deadline Hollywood reported that the viewing figures were comparable to what would have been considered a major summer theatrical box office hit. Tom Hanks later described the shift to streaming as an absolute heartbreak, saying he desperately wished audiences could experience the film with 800 strangers in a movie theater and walk out with something in common. Despite his disappointment about losing the theatrical experience, Hanks acknowledged that Apple had essentially saved the film from sitting unreleased indefinitely, calling their acquisition a magnificent gift that allowed the movie to reach audiences during the pandemic. Fact 12, the pilot house set was built 30% larger than reality. When production designer David Crank set out to recreate the USS Kids pilot house for Greyhound, he faced an impossible challenge that plagues nearly every filmmaker working with historical military spaces. The real pilot house on a Fletcher-class destroyer measures a cramped 10 feet by 18 feet, and during World War II, this tiny room would be packed with a dozen or more crew members operating navigation equipment, communications gear, and control systems, while the captain barked orders during combat. For a film production, squeezing in cameras, boom microphones, lighting equipment, dolly tracks, and a full crew alongside the actors would have been physically impossible in an authentic recreation. Our director Aaron Schneider and his cinematographer needed enough room to capture the action from multiple angles while still maintaining the tight, claustrophobic atmosphere that defined life aboard these warships. Crank's solution was to build the pilot house set approximately 30% larger than the original dimensions, carefully calculating the maximum size increase that would allow filmmaking to happen without making the space feel unrealistically spacious. The entire set was constructed on top of a massive gimbal platform that stood 12 feet high, and the pilot house structure itself added another 10 feet on top of that, creating a towering contraption that could tilt more than 30 degrees in any direction to simulate the violent rolling of a destroyer in rough Atlantic seas. The production team filled this expanded space with period-accurate equipment borrowed or recreated from other museum ships, including radar units, voice pipes, helm controls, and all the authentic hardware that would have been present in 1942. The extra room meant cinematographer Shelley Johnson could shoot the entire film handheld, moving freely around Tom Hanks and the other actors as they performed their duties during simulated combat. Despite the additional space, the set still felt incredibly confined during filming, with cast and crew constantly navigating around each other in what remained a genuinely tight working environment. The 30% expansion proved to be the perfect balance, giving the production just enough room to function while preserving the authentic sense of working in a space where every square inch mattered during wartime. Fact 13. The taunting U-boat scenes never happened. One of the most memorable and chilling moments in Greyhound comes when a German U-boat commander breaks into the convoy's radio frequency and begins taunting Commander Krauss and his crew with threatening messages, even referring to himself as Grey Wolf and wishing them luck surviving the night. The scenes are designed to heighten the psychological terror of the battle, giving the faceless enemy submarine crews an intimidating voice that gets inside the heads of the Allied sailors. The problem is that this dramatic device is completely made up and would have been virtually impossible in real life. German U-boats operated under strict radio silence protocols during convoy attacks specifically because breaking that silence would have been a death sentence for the submarine. Every Allied naval vessel was equipped with high-frequency direction-finding equipment, which sailors and officers referred to as Huff Duff, and this technology could detect radio transmissions and use triangulation to pinpoint the exact location of any ship that was broadcasting. If a U-boat captain had actually started transmitting taunting messages over the radio, Allied destroyers would have immediately locked onto their position and sent depth charges raining down on them within minutes. While it's true that German submarines occasionally stumbled upon Allied communication frequencies and could listen in on convoy chatter, they never had the ability to hijack those frequencies and broadcast their own messages through the convoy's ship-to-ship communication system. The film's screenwriter Tom Hanks and director Aaron Schneider invented these radio-taunting sequences purely to increase the dramatic tension and give the German forces a more personal, menacing presence in the story. In C.S. Forrester's original 1955 novel, The Good Shepherd, there's actually a small reference to a British officer mentioning that a German operator occasionally chips in with rude remarks on their radio circuit. But even this was extremely rare, and certainly nothing like the sustained psychological warfare depicted in the movie. Fact 14. The USS Kidd is mentioned in its own movie. One of the strangest Easter eggs in Greyhound happens when the film references the very ship it was filmed on, creating a bizarre historical loop that most viewers would never catch. During the movie, there's a line of dialogue where characters mention that the USS Kidd encountered an underwater decoy device called a Pillenwerfer on its first patrol, establishing that other destroyers in the fleet have already dealt with these German submarine tricks. The problem is that the real USS Kidd, the museum ship where they actually filmed the movie in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, wasn't even launched until late February 1943. More than a year after the events depicted in Greyhound, which takes place in February 1942. This creates a weird situation where the production team included a reference to their filming location as if it were already operational during the time period of the story, even though historically that would have been impossible. The USS Kidd didn't exist yet when Commander Krauss would have been leading his convoy through the black pit of the Atlantic, so any mention of it encountering German submarines is purely fictional timeline manipulation. It's like filming a movie about World War I on an aircraft carrier and then having characters casually mention that same carrier fought in battles before it was ever built. The USS Kidd was actually named after Rear Admiral Isaac C. Kidd, who was killed aboard the USS Arizona during the attack on Pearl Harbor, becoming the first American flag officer to die in World War II. But the real destroyer spent most of its service in the Pacific Theater, not the Atlantic, screening aircraft carriers and surviving a direct kamikaze attack. It never participated in the kind of convoy escort missions shown in the film. By including this reference, the filmmakers created a playful nod to the ship that made their movie possible, even if it meant bending historical accuracy to give the Kidd a fictional Atlantic deployment that never actually happened. Fact 15. Hanks adapted his third-ever screenplay. When Tom Hanks sat down to adapt C.S. Forrester's novel The Good Shepherd into the screenplay for Greyhound, he was entering territory he'd only explored twice before in his decades-long career. This war drama marks just the third film script Hanks has ever written, and making him one of Hollywood's most selective writer-actors despite his massive success in front of the camera. Hanks first tried his hand at screenwriting back in 1996 with That Thing You Do, a film he also directed about a fictional 1960s rock band called The Wonders. The movie became a cult classic and showcased Hanks's ability to capture a specific era with warmth and authenticity. He wouldn't return to screenwriting for another 15 years when he wrote and directed Larry Crowne in 2011, a romantic comedy where he starred opposite Julia Roberts as a middle-aged man reinventing his life after losing his job. The gap between Larry Crowne and Greyhound stretched another 9 years, making his decision to personally adapt Forrester's naval thriller all the more significant. In interviews, Hanks explained that he didn't want to do the work of writing the screenplay and had hoped somebody else would take on the adaptation, but when nobody else stepped forward, he felt compelled to bring his vision to life. He described having what he called a bit of a fever dream of desire to make the film real, even if it meant doing all the writing himself just so he could enjoy the vision of the movie in his own head. What makes Hanks's approach to screenwriting particularly unusual is that he's never been a prolific writer despite clearly having the talent for it. Most actor-writers who break into screenwriting tend to write more frequently once they've proven themselves, but Hanks has remained highly selective, only putting pen to paper when a project truly captures his imagination. His methodical approach to Greyhound's screenplay, which stays remarkably faithful to Forster's novel while adding his own touches like the opening romance scene, demonstrates why he chooses his writing projects so carefully. He only writes when he has something specific and personal to say.